First story: The Lighthouse That Learned My Name. I never believed the ocean could remember people. I grew up in Bar Harbor, Maine, listening to fishermen tell stories that always sounded a little too dramatic after midnight. Every old captain had a tale about ghost ships, impossible fog, or voices drifting across the water. I laughed at every single one. Until the autumn, I accepted the temporary lighthouse keeper job on Black Gull Lighthouse. The position only lasted 3 weeks. The previous keeper had disappeared. The Coast Guard concluded he probably slipped from the rocks during a storm. They never found his body. The lighthouse still worked perfectly, so they only needed someone to keep the light operational until a permanent crew arrived. It sounded like easy money. The supply boat dropped me off early Monday morning. The lighthouse stood alone on a narrow island barely larger than a football field. Jagged black rocks surrounded every side, and the Atlantic smashed against them without mercy. The tower itself looked older than photographs suggested. The white paint peeled away like dead skin, exposing gray stone underneath. Captain Ellis helped unload my supplies. Before leaving, he hesitated. "You hear someone knocking?" He looked directly into my eyes. "Don't answer." I laughed. "There isn't anybody else on this island." "I know." He climbed back aboard without another word. The boat disappeared into the fog. Silence settled around me. Not peaceful silence, waiting silence. The first 2 days passed normally. I cleaned the lantern room, checked the generator, recorded weather conditions. Every evening the light swept across the ocean exactly as it had for decades. Nothing unusual happened. Then came Wednesday night. A thick fog swallowed everything beyond 30 feet. Around 11, I heard 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Not at the lighthouse door, at the glass, 30 feet above the ocean. Impossible. I froze. Another 3 knocks echoed through the lantern room. The windows shook slightly. Something was outside, floating, watching. When I forced myself to look, nothing, only white fog. I convinced myself expanding metal or strong wind caused the sound. I even laughed at my own imagination. Then I noticed something: wet footprints. They began at the center of the room. Not the doorway, not the stairs, the center. As though someone had appeared there and walked down. I searched every floor. Nobody. The footprints stopped outside, right at the cliff. No return tracks. Thursday morning I radioed Captain Ellis. "Did the previous keeper mention strange noises?" Silence answered first. Finally, "He started talking about someone climbing the lighthouse every night." "There aren't any boats." "I know. What happened to him?" Another long pause. "He stopped answering the radio." The transmission ended. That evening I locked every door, every window, every hatch. At exactly midnight, someone started climbing the spiral staircase. Slow, heavy. Metal boots striking iron steps. Clang, clang, clang. The sound climbed higher, floor after floor. There was nowhere else to go, only me. I grabbed the emergency flare gun. The footsteps stopped outside the lantern room. Then, a calm male voice. "I kept the light for 40 years. Silence. My shift is over. Silence again. It's yours now." The handle slowly turned. I fired the flare. The room exploded in red light. Nobody stood outside. Only darkness. Yet the staircase below was soaked with seawater. I barely slept. The next morning I found an old journal hidden beneath loose floorboards. It belonged to Nathan Brooks, a keeper from the 1970s. Every page described the same events. Knocking, footsteps, voices, wet footprints. The final sentence made my stomach twist. The lighthouse doesn't protect ships. It feeds. The journal explained everything. Long before modern navigation, ships wrecked constantly around the island. Hundreds drowned. Local legends claimed the lighthouse learned every victim's name. Every soul lost at sea became part of its light. The brighter the beacon, the more voices it held. When too many spirits escaped, the lighthouse needed another keeper. Not to maintain the lamp, to replace the one it consumed. I wanted to leave immediately. The weather changed first. A hurricane arrived 12 hours early. The supply boat couldn't reach me. The radio died. The satellite phone displayed nothing but static. I was trapped. That night, the knocking returned. Only this time, It came from every window. Hundreds of knocks, all together. Then hundreds of voices whispered my name. Not shouted, whispered, like people afraid to wake something sleeping beneath the sea. I covered my ears. It didn't matter. The voices came from inside my head. They weren't asking me to open the door. They begged me not to turn off the light. Please, if the light dies, it comes back. I climbed into the lantern room. The beam suddenly stopped rotating. The gears had frozen solid. Outside, something enormous moved beneath the waves. It wasn't a whale. It wasn't any creature I knew. The ocean rose around its back like hills lifting from beneath the surface. Two pale horns broke through the water, each taller than the lighthouse itself. Then one eye opened. Its pupil wasn't black. It was filled with tiny human faces, all screaming. The lighthouse trembled. Every window shattered. The voices became one impossible scream. "Keep the light alive!" I threw every emergency fuel reserve into the burner. Flames roared brighter than ever. The beam struck the ocean. The creature stopped moving. Slowly, it sank. The sea became calm again. Too calm. Morning arrived. A rescue boat finally reached the island. Captain Ellis stepped inside. He looked relieved. "You survived. What was that thing?" He didn't answer. Instead, he asked a different question. "What name did it call you?" My blood turned cold. "I never told you it knew my name." Captain Ellis lowered his eyes. "It knows everyone's." He handed me another journal. Brand new. Blank. Except for the first sentence already written inside. In my handwriting. "Today I became the keeper." I dropped the book. "I didn't write that." "You will. I leave today." Captain Ellis looked genuinely sad. No one ever leaves. The rescue crew refused to meet my eyes. As we sailed away, I looked back one last time. Someone stood at the top of the lighthouse, wearing my jacket, my hat, my face. It raised one hand and waved. The others acted as if they saw nothing. When we reached the harbor, Captain Ellis quietly asked me to sign the departure paperwork. The signature already matched mine perfectly. I had never touched the pen. I drove home, burned every photograph from the island, ignored every nightmare. Months passed. Life slowly became normal again, until last week. A package arrived without a return address. Inside was a fresh lighthouse maintenance log. Every page was filled. Every entry described things I had supposedly repaired during the past month. Every line carried my signature. The final page contained only one sentence. "Storm arriving tonight. Please return before the light goes out." I laughed. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. When I answered, I heard waves crashing, a lighthouse bell, and my own voice whispering, "You're late." Outside my window, more than 200 miles from the ocean, I heard 3 slow knocks on the glass. Knock, knock, knock. Second story. The lighthouse that learned my name. The first time I saw Black Hollow Lighthouse, I laughed. It stood alone on a jagged stretch of the Maine coast, surrounded by cliffs that looked like broken teeth. Every local in the nearby town of Harrow's Point avoided even looking toward it after sunset. They had stories. Whispered ones. The kind people tell only after checking the windows twice. I had never believed in any of it. My name is Ethan Carter. I was a freelance photographer traveling across the United States, documenting abandoned places that people claimed were haunted. Every location had disappointed me. Strange noises always became loose pipes. Shadows became broken windows. Ghosts became bored people desperate for attention. Black Hollow Lighthouse was supposed to be another disappointment. Instead, it became the last place I would ever understand. The lighthouse had been abandoned for almost 50 years after several keepers vanished without explanation. Official reports blamed storms, isolation, or mental illness. The locals blamed something far older than the ocean. I rented a small cabin outside Harrow's Point. The old woman who handed me the keys refused to take my money until I promised one thing. Leave before the light turns toward land. I smiled politely. Lighthouses don't turn. She stared at me without blinking. This one does. That evening, I packed my cameras, extra batteries, food, and a sleeping bag before hiking toward the cliffs. The sky was painted orange and purple as waves exploded against the rocks below. The lighthouse stood nearly 100 feet tall, its white paint peeled away by decades of salt and storms. Rust covered the metal railings. Every window looked completely black. The front door wasn't locked. That surprised me. Inside, everything smelled of damp wood and ancient salt water. Dust covered every surface except the spiral staircase. Someone had been climbing it recently. Fresh footprints, only one set, leading upward. I called out, "Hello." Nothing answered. I climbed anyway. Each step echoed through the tower like another heartbeat. Halfway up, I found something carved into the wall. "Do not watch the light." The letters looked fresh. I kept climbing. The lantern room at the top was empty. At least, it appeared empty. The giant lens stood perfectly clean despite the decades of neglect. It reflected my flashlight in impossible ways. Every angle showed another version of the room. Some reflections looked normal, others didn't. In one reflection, someone stood behind me. I spun around. Nothing. When I looked back into the glass, the figure was closer. A tall man wearing the old uniform of a lighthouse keeper. His face was completely hidden beneath darkness. I raised my camera and snapped a picture. The flash filled the room. The reflection vanished. My camera screen displayed only static. Then every battery inside my backpack died at exactly the same moment. The air suddenly became freezing. Outside, the lighthouse lamp moved, slowly, very slowly. Not in circles over the sea, toward the land, toward the town. Every house below went dark. The entire coastline lost power. Only the lighthouse remained illuminated. Then I heard footsteps beneath me. Heavy, slow. 1, 2, 3. Someone was climbing. I shouted down, "I know you're there!" The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then a voice answered. My own voice. "I'm almost there." Every hair on my body stood upright. I backed into the lantern room. The footsteps continued. Closer, closer, closer. A hand appeared around the staircase, gray, waterlogged. Its fingers were far too long. Then another hand, then another. As if several people were climbing together while sharing the same body. I ran downstairs. The staircase never seemed to end. I should have reached the entrance within seconds. Instead, I kept descending for what felt like an hour. The walls became wet. The smell of salt changed into something rotten. The windows disappeared. When I finally reached the bottom, the front door was gone. Only solid stone remained. Behind me, the footsteps had stopped again. I turned. Nobody. Then the lighthouse lamp above exploded into brilliant white light. Every wall became transparent. Outside, the ocean was gone. Instead of water, thousands of people stood perfectly still where the sea should have been. They all faced the lighthouse. None of them blinked. None of them moved. Every face looked pale. Every face looked drowned. Every face was smiling. Then all of them lifted one finger at exactly the same time, pointing at me. The glass around the lantern began humming. Voices filled the tower. Hundreds, thousands. Whispering the same sentence, he finally came back. I screamed that they had the wrong person. The whispers became louder. "No, you left. You promised. You remember." Images flooded my mind. Not memories. Someone else's memories. Standing inside the lighthouse over a century ago, lighting the great lamp every night, watching ships disappear into impossible fog, hearing children crying beneath the waves. Opening the lantern room door for something that climbed out of the sea, I fell to my knees. None of those memories belonged to me. Did they? Then I noticed an old brass plaque bolted beside the staircase. Keeper Ethan Carter. Appointed October the 7th, 1892. I stared at the name. My name. My exact name. Impossible. I tore the plaque from the wall. Behind it was another, and another, and another. Every plaque carried the same name. Ethan Carter. Each one with a different year. Each keeper had supposedly served until disappearing for over 100 years. The whispers stopped. The silence became unbearable. Then someone gently placed a cold hand on my shoulder. I already knew who it was. I didn't turn around. Because somewhere deep inside me, I already recognized that touch. The lamp above ignited by itself. Its beam swept across the invisible ocean. The drowned figures slowly walked into the darkness, one after another, until none remained. Morning sunlight entered through broken windows. The ocean had returned. The cliffs looked normal again. The lighthouse was silent. The entrance door stood wide open. The sheriff found me sitting at the top beside the lamp. He asked my name. For several seconds, I couldn't remember it. Eventually I answered, Ethan Carter. His face turned pale. He quietly removed an old newspaper clipping from his pocket. The headline read, "Local lighthouse keeper Ethan Carter disappears without a trace." The date was 134 years ago. I laughed because it had to be a joke. The sheriff didn't laugh. He slowly held up an old black and white photograph recovered from the lighthouse decades earlier. The keeper standing beside the lamp was me. Not someone who looked like me. The same scar above my eyebrow, the same wedding ring, the same eyes. The sheriff whispered one final sentence before leaving. "We've found you here every few decades." He walked away. I tried to follow. I couldn't. The lighthouse door would not let me cross its shadow. Every evening since then, the lamp lights itself. Every night I hear ships calling from the fog. Every sunrise I forget another piece of my life outside these walls. Sometimes tourists climb the cliff with cameras. I warn them. Most laugh. Just like I did. Sometimes they ignore me and climb to the lantern room anyway. When the light finally turns toward land, another plaque appears beneath the others, waiting for another name, waiting for another keeper. And every night, just before darkness swallows the coast, I hear someone climbing the spiral staircase. Each footstep sounds exactly like my own. This time, I think the one reaching the top is the real Ethan Carter. Third story, the lighthouse that counted the dead. I never believed the ocean could remember people. If you asked me a few years ago whether I believed in ghosts, curses, or things that should never exist, I would have laughed and told you that loneliness makes people imagine monsters. I wish I could go back to being that man. Because now, every single night, I wake up hearing the same horn somewhere inside my head. 3 long blasts, then silence. Then, footsteps climbing a staircase that no longer exists. My name is Ethan Walker, and this happened off the coast of Maine. I had accepted a temporary maintenance contract to restore an abandoned lighthouse standing on a lonely rock nearly 8 miles from the mainland. The structure had been closed for decades after severe storm damage, and eventually everyone simply forgot about it. Local fishermen refused to get anywhere near the island after sunset. They claimed strange lights appeared where no electricity had existed for years. Others talked about voices calling from the fog. I dismissed all of it. People always invent stories about old lighthouses. When Captain Harold Benson dropped me off with enough supplies for 2 weeks, he stared at the tower instead of me. "If the light comes on..." He stopped. I asked what he meant. He looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "Don't answer if someone knocks." Then, he untied the boat and left. That should have been enough to make me leave with him. Instead, I laughed. The lighthouse was taller than I expected. Weather had eaten away at the stone. Rust covered every metal surface. Windows were cracked. Salt coated everything like frozen dust. Inside, the spiral staircase climbed forever into darkness. The silence felt unnatural, not peaceful. Listening. The first day passed without incident. I repaired broken wiring, cleared debris, checked old generators that had long since failed. There was absolutely no source of electricity anywhere inside the building. That night, dense fog surrounded the island. So thick I couldn't even see the shoreline below. Around midnight, the lighthouse lamp turned on. I froze. The entire lens above me exploded with brilliant white light. Impossible. Nothing inside the tower worked. Every cable had been disconnected for decades. Yet the beam slowly rotated across the sea, exactly as if someone invisible were operating it. I climbed toward the lantern room. The higher I went, the colder the air became. When I reached the top, nobody was there. Only the giant lens rotating silently. No motor, no sound, nothing moving except the impossible light. Then, I heard footsteps below me. Heavy, slow, someone climbing. Hello? No answer. The footsteps continued. Step, step, step. I grabbed my flashlight and hurried down. Nobody. Every floor was empty. The main entrance remained locked from the inside. No footprints. No wet clothing. Nothing. That night I barely slept. Morning finally came. The light had disappeared. Everything looked normal again. I convinced myself exhaustion had caused hallucinations. By afternoon, I found an old storage room hidden behind collapsed shelves. Inside sat several wooden crates filled with journals. Every keeper who had served the lighthouse had written daily entries. The earliest dated back more than a century. Most were ordinary. Weather observations, ship sightings, maintenance reports. Then I reached the journal belonging to Samuel Briggs. The handwriting changed halfway through. Large, uneven, panicked, it read, "The sea sends them back when the light wakes." The following page, "They knock before sunrise." Another, "They always know your name." The last page contained only one sentence repeated over and over, "Do not open the door," hundreds of times. The writing covered every inch of paper. That evening I called Captain Benson on the satellite phone. No signal. The radio produced only static. Darkness returned. Fog rolled across the ocean faster than I had ever seen. Exactly at midnight, 3 horn blasts echoed across the water. The lighthouse turned on again. Then, knocking. 3 slow knocks. From the front door, I stood completely still. Another knock. Then a voice. "Ethan." It sounded exactly like my younger brother, the brother who had drowned 12 years earlier. I stopped breathing. His voice came again. "I'm cold." "No. Impossible." I backed away. Another knock. "Ethan, please." Tears filled my eyes before I realized it. Every memory came rushing back. The accident, the rescue that came too late, his funeral, the guilt I carried every day. The voice outside sounded perfect. Every word, every breath, every pause. Then something changed. It laughed, not loudly, quietly, patiently, like someone trying very hard to imitate a human. The knocking became scratching, long nails dragging across old wood. Hours passed before sunrise. The sound finally stopped. When daylight arrived, I opened the door. There were no footprints, only deep claw marks cut into solid oak, each groove nearly half an inch deep. I packed immediately. I didn't care about the contract anymore. When Captain Benson arrived later that afternoon, he looked relieved to see me alive. As we pulled away from the island, I asked him why he hadn't warned me. He stayed silent. Finally, he spoke. Because nobody believes the warning. Halfway to shore, I looked back. The lighthouse stood dark. Then, someone appeared in the lantern room. A man, wearing clothing from another. She slowly raised one hand, not waving, pointing, at me. Captain Benson saw him too. His face turned white. He increased speed without saying another word. I never returned. Months passed. Nightmares never stopped. Doctors blamed stress. Friends blamed isolation. I tried believing them. Until one evening, I received a package with no return address. Inside was one photograph, taken from inside the lighthouse, looking down toward the dock. Captain Benson was standing beside his boat. I was beside him. The date stamped beneath the picture matched the day he rescued me. Someone had been watching us. Someone inside the lighthouse. I turned the photograph over. One sentence had been written in faded black ink. "You forgot to count yourself." I looked closer. There were tiny figures standing in every lighthouse window. At first I thought they were shadows, then I counted them. 1, 2, 3, 14. But something felt wrong. I counted again, 15, again, 16. Every time I counted, there was one more. Until finally, the last figure stood closest to the glass. It wasn't wearing old keeper clothes. It wore my jacket. My backpack rested beside it. Its face was pressed against the window, smiling. Last week I heard that another maintenance crew had been hired to restore the abandoned lighthouse. The newspaper said the island had been empty for decades. No record existed of anyone living there after the final keeper disappeared. Not even me. My employment records had vanished. The contract no longer existed. Captain Benson's family insisted he had died nearly 15 years ago. His boat had never been recovered. Sometimes, just before midnight, I hear waves outside my apartment. I live hundreds of miles from the ocean. The smell of salt fills every room. Water drips down walls that remain completely dry. Then the horn sounds. 3 long blasts. The lights flicker. And someone begins climbing a spiral staircase just beyond my bedroom door. Every night, the footsteps stop outside. Every night, 3 slow knocks follow. Every night, a voice whispers through the wood, "Ethan, we still haven't finished counting." 4th story. The lighthouse that kept the last voice. I used to believe that every lighthouse existed for one reason: to save lives. I don't believe that anymore. My name is Ethan Walker. I grew up in Portland, Maine, where the sea becomes part of your blood before you can even swim. My father had been a fisherman. My grandfather had spent nearly 30 years maintaining navigation lights along the Atlantic coast. So when I accepted a seasonal position as the caretaker of Black Alder Lighthouse, nobody in my family questioned it. They simply warned me not to stay longer than necessary. I laughed. Old fishermen always carried stories with them. They said the lighthouse had been abandoned decades earlier after several keepers disappeared without leaving a single trace. The official reports blamed storms, accidents, or isolation. The locals blamed something else. Something that lived beyond the fog. I arrived during the first week of October. The supply boat dropped me off shortly before sunset. The captain refused my offer to help unload the crates. "You have everything you need." He barely looked at me. "If you hear someone outside after dark..." He stopped. His face turned pale. "Don't answer." Then he untied the rope. Within minutes, his boat vanished into the mist. Silence swallowed the island. Black Alder Lighthouse stood nearly 100 feet above the cliffs. Its white paint had long since peeled away. The iron staircase groaned beneath every step. The lantern room overlooked miles of endless gray water. Nothing looked unusual. Nothing, except for the journal waiting on the wooden table. No dust covered it. Someone had opened it recently. The first pages listed weather reports. Wind direction, wave height, visibility. Perfectly ordinary. Then the handwriting changed. If the light goes out, they come closer. The next entry. They never knock twice. Another. I saw my brother standing below the cliffs tonight. My brother drowned 12 years ago. I smiled nervously. Someone had clearly enjoyed frightening the new caretaker. I closed the journal. Outside, something knocked. 3 slow taps. Not on the lighthouse door. On the outer stone wall. Impossible. No one could stand there. The cliffs dropped straight into the Atlantic. I grabbed my flashlight. Nothing. Only darkness. Only waves. Only fog. The knocking stopped. That night's sleep refused to come. Around 2 in the morning, the lighthouse horn activated by itself. 1 deep blast. Then another. There was no power running to it. I rushed upstairs. The control panel remained completely dead. Yet the horn continued. Each blast echoed across the sea. Then, voices answered. Hundreds of them, far away, hidden inside the fog, calling back. I couldn't understand the words, but they were getting closer. Morning finally arrived. The voices disappeared with the sunrise. I convinced myself exhaustion had caused hallucinations. The second night proved me wrong. At exactly midnight, someone climbed the spiral staircase. Slow footsteps, metal against metal. 1 step, pause. Another step, pause. I stood frozen outside my room holding an old wrench. The footsteps reached my floor, stopped. Silence. Then, a woman's voice whispered only inches from my door. "Ethan." Every muscle in my body locked. Only one woman had ever spoken my name exactly like that. My mother. She had died from cancer 5 years earlier. Tears filled my eyes before I even realized it. The voice returned. "My son." I've been waiting. I almost opened the door. Then I remembered the captain's warning. "Don't answer." The handle slowly turned. Back and forth. Back and forth. The door shook once. Twice. 3 times. Then everything became silent again. I didn't sleep, not even for a minute. The following afternoon, I searched the storage basement. Hidden beneath old equipment, I discovered another journal. Much older. The leather cover had almost fallen apart. Inside were newspaper clippings. Disappearances, shipwrecks, Missing lighthouse keepers. Missing Coast Guard crews. One article caught my attention. Every disappearance had happened after witnesses reported hearing familiar voices calling from offshore. Family members, friends, dead children, dead spouses, dead parents. The final page contained a rough drawing, not of the lighthouse, of something standing beneath it. Tall, thin, impossible. Its arms reached farther than its own height. Its face had no eyes, only an open mouth stretching from one side of its head to the other. Below the sketch, someone had written, "It borrows voices." That evening, the fog arrived before sunset, thicker than ever. The light barely reached 50 feet. At exactly 11:47, someone began singing outside, an old lullaby, the one my mother used every night when I was little. I climbed into the lantern room. Below me, a woman stood on the rocks. Impossible. The tide had completely covered them. She smiled. She looked exactly like my mother. Exactly. Every wrinkle, every strand of gray hair, every movement. She raised one hand. "Ethan, come home." I knew it wasn't real. I knew, but something inside me desperately wanted to believe. She continued smiling, then her jaw slowly opened. Farther, 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 until it split her entire face apart. Inside, there was only darkness. Hundreds of whispers poured from that impossible mouth. Every voice belonged to someone different. Children, old men, women crying, sailors screaming, all speaking together, all saying the same sentence. "Turn off the light." The lighthouse suddenly shook. The lantern flickered. Again. Again. Then darkness. The beam died. Instantly. The sea exploded with movement. Thousands of pale figures emerged from the fog. Not walking. Floating. Every one of them stared toward the lighthouse. Every one of them smiled, their mouths opened wider than humanly possible. They began climbing the cliffs, straight up the stone, without using their hands. Without making a sound. I restarted the emergency generator. Nothing. The wiring had melted. There was no fire, no heat. The copper simply dripped onto the floor like liquid wax. The first figure reached the lighthouse entrance. Then another, then dozens more. No footsteps, only scratching. Slow, patient, like fingernails across old wood. The front door bent inward, not from force, from pressure, as though hundreds of bodies leaned against it together. I barricaded myself inside the lantern room. The scratching continued for hours. Just before sunrise, everything stopped. I carefully looked outside. Nothing remained. Only wet footprints. Thousands of them. Leading away from the lighthouse, into the sea. The supply boat arrived 2 days later. The captain immediately noticed something. He asked why the lighthouse lamp had changed color. I looked upward. The glass no longer shone white. It glowed faintly blue. He refused to explain. Instead, he ordered me onto the boat immediately. As we sailed away, I looked back one last time. Someone stood inside the lantern room, watching us. It looked exactly like me. Same clothes, same face, same posture. It slowly smiled, then raised one hand. The captain noticed it too. His face lost all color. He increased the engine speed without saying a word. Back on the mainland, I tried forgetting everything. I found another job. Moved to Bangor. Stopped talking about Black Alder Lighthouse. Months passed. Life slowly became normal again. Until one rainy evening, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed my own number. I answered before thinking. No one spoke. Then, very quietly, I heard waves, a lighthouse horn, and my own voice whispering, "Ethan, please come back." I'm still here. I threw the phone into the river. The next morning I bought another one. New number, new carrier, new everything. It didn't matter. Every year on the same October night, at exactly 11:47, my phone rings. No matter where I am, no matter what device I own. When I finally gather enough courage to answer, I always hear the same thing. Waves crashing below stone cliffs, the slow turning of a lighthouse lantern, my own breathing, and another version of myself, growing weaker every year, begging me not to let the light go out, because someday, the one calling me will no longer be the copy inside Black Alder Lighthouse. It will be me. And whatever borrowed my voice will already be waiting for the next caretaker. Fifth story. The Lighthouse That Never Faced the Sea. My name is Ethan Mercer, and until that autumn, I never believed a place could remember people. If someone had told me that a lighthouse could wait for a specific person, I would have laughed. I don't laugh anymore. The assignment sounded simple. Spend 3 weeks on Black River Lighthouse, a forgotten station nearly 30 miles off the coast of Maine. Restore the electrical system, inspect the beacon, and document structural damage before winter storms arrived. No tourists. No boats except the weekly supply run. No neighbors. Exactly the kind of isolation I always enjoyed. Captain Douglas Hanson ferried me there aboard his rusted fishing vessel. During the entire trip, he barely spoke. The waves rolled beneath us like sleeping mountains, and thick gray fog swallowed everything beyond 100 yards. As the lighthouse finally emerged from the mist, something immediately felt wrong. It wasn't abandoned, it looked awake. The tower stood nearly 100 feet above the cliffs, but instead of facing open water, its lantern room pointed several degrees inland toward a wall of jagged black rocks where no ship could ever sail. "Why isn't it facing the ocean?" I asked. The captain froze. "You don't ask that." "What?" "You just don't." He tied the boat to the dock with trembling hands. "When the sun sets, keep the light off." I thought the whole point of a lighthouse was, I said keep it off. Then he climbed back into his boat. He never looked at me again. The engine roared to life. Within seconds, the fog swallowed him completely. I was alone. The inside of the lighthouse smelled like salt, wet stone, and old wood that had absorbed generations of storms. Everything had been left exactly as it had been decades earlier. Old journals, oil lamps, rusted tools, a grandfather clock that had stopped at exactly 12 minutes past 2. Every single photograph hanging on the walls showed different keepers. Every one of them had the same expression. They weren't smiling. They looked exhausted, terrified, as though each photograph had been taken seconds before something reached them. The first night passed quietly. Almost. Around midnight, I heard footsteps above me. Slow, measured. 1, 2, 3. Someone was walking around inside the lantern room. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed the spiral staircase. Nothing. No footprints, no open windows, only silence. When I turned to leave, the enormous Fresnel lens rotated by itself, very slowly, grinding against rusted gears that had not worked in decades. My flashlight flickered. Then the beam landed on words carved into the metal base beneath the lens. "Do not let it see the light." I told myself someone had carved it as a joke. I almost believed it. The following morning, I searched the maintenance office. Hidden beneath loose floorboards, I discovered the final journal of the last lighthouse keeper. Most pages had been ruined by moisture. Only fragments remained. "It comes when the beacon shines. Never answer voices from the rocks. It isn't drowning people. It is replacing them." The final page contained only one sentence. "It already knows your name." I closed the journal. Someone whispered behind me. "Ethan." I spun around. Nobody. Then the whisper came again, closer. "Ethan." The voice sounded exactly like my younger brother. My brother had died 11 years earlier. That night, the ocean became unnaturally calm. Not a single wave touched the cliffs. No wind, no gulls, nothing. The silence hurt my ears. Around 1 in the morning, a deep horn echoed through the darkness. Not a ship, something much lower, older. It vibrated through the stone beneath my feet. Then another, then another. Lights appeared beneath the water. Hundreds of them. They moved in perfect formation toward the lighthouse. I rushed to the observation window. There were no ships, only lights, floating beneath the surface, keeping perfect distance from one another, like eyes, watching. The horn sounded again. This time, every window in the lighthouse rattled violently. The old radio suddenly came alive despite having no power. Static. Then a man's voice. "Turn on the beacon." I grabbed the microphone. "Who's there?" Static. "Turn on the beacon." "Who are you?" Long silence. Then, "You already did." Every light inside the lighthouse exploded. Darkness swallowed everything. Footsteps circled me. Not one person, many, bare feet dragging across wet stone. I ran upstairs, locked the lantern room, pressed my back against the heavy iron door. The footsteps stopped outside, then came scratching, slow, patient, as though dozens of fingernails were tracing circles across the metal. The scratching continued until sunrise. When daylight returned, the door opened easily, nothing stood outside, but the floor was soaked with seawater and footprints. Hundreds of them. Every print pointed upward, none pointed back down. The weekly supply boat never arrived, neither did the next one. Days blended together, the fog never lifted. Food became scarce. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of standing beneath the ocean, not drowning, walking, following endless lines of people toward a lighthouse that stood upside down beneath the sea. Its beams shone into the darkness below, not above. Each morning I woke with salt water inside my boots. One afternoon I climbed onto the outer balcony. The sea was perfectly still. Then I noticed someone standing on a distant rock nearly half a mile away. He wore an old lighthouse keeper's uniform. He raised one arm, slowly waved. I waved back without thinking. Instantly he disappeared. That night something knocked on the lighthouse door. 3 slow knocks, then silence. Another 3. I opened the viewing hatch. Captain Hansen stood outside. Except, his boat wasn't there. Neither were any waves. He stood on dry stone where the ocean should have been. His clothes dripped seawater. His eyes reflected no light. "You're late," I said. He smiled. "I've always been here." The smile stretched farther than any human face should. I slammed the hatch shut. The knocking continued until morning. The next day I finally decided to leave. The emergency rowboat remained tied below the dock. I packed food, water, journals, and emergency flares. As I untied the rope, someone whispered beside my ear, "If you leave, who watches the light?" I turned. Nobody. I stepped into the boat anyway. The sea instantly erupted. Towering waves surrounded me from every direction, although the sky remained clear. The lighthouse beam suddenly ignited behind me. I had never turned it on. Its white light swept across the water. Everything beneath the surface moved. Thousands. No. Millions. Human shapes rose from the darkness below, not swimming, walking, straight toward the surface. Their empty faces stared upward, toward me. Every one of them opened their mouths together. No sound emerged. Only black seawater poured out. The rowboat spun violently. I lost consciousness. When I woke, I was back inside the lighthouse. My packed supplies remained untouched. The rowboat hung from its original rope, dry, as though it had never entered the water. I searched every room for an explanation. Instead, I found a framed photograph hanging beside the entrance. It hadn't been there before. The picture was new, crystal clear. It showed every lighthouse keeper since the station opened, standing together, smiling. I recognized Captain Hansen, the men from the old photographs, faces from faded journals. Then I saw myself, standing in the center, wearing the same weathered uniform, smiling exactly like the others. On the bottom of the frame, someone had written the date, not today's date, a date exactly 50 years in the future. That was when I finally understood. The lighthouse had never trapped me. It had accepted me. Now I keep the beacon dark every night, because sometimes I hear ships passing through the fog. Sometimes I hear desperate voices calling for help. Sometimes I even hear my own voice screaming from somewhere far across the water, begging to be rescued. I never answer, because I know what waits beneath the sea, and I know something far worse. One night, sooner or later, the light will turn itself on. When it does, the ocean won't be looking for ships anymore. It will be looking for you.